Hi, I'm Leslie Spiro. I've been living in Oxford for about 20 years, and I'm the eldest son of Harry Spiro, who is a Holocaust survivor. We knew from a very early stage that my father was born in Poland and in a town called Piotrków, and that there'd been the Holocaust, and that his mother, father, and his sister had been taken away to Treblinka and killed. He'd worked first as a slave labourer and then gone into the camp system as the Russians approached. So we knew that level of detail. And the one story that we knew from very, very early on was the wisdom of my mother's mother, my grandmother on my father's side. And when they were deporting the ghetto in Piotrków, there was a thing that all the people who were working in this factory should leave. And my father would have been about 12 years old at the time. I think he was 10 when the Germans invaded Poland. He had got this job in this factory where he started to be paid, and then they stopped the pay, but at least they fed him. And he wanted to go with his parents and his sister. And she pushed him out into the street with, these kind of family legends, this thing, at least let one of us survive. And my father talks very movingly about walking down the ghetto, this would be 3 in the morning or something, streets being deserted, apart from a few people who were working in the factories. And that was the last time he saw his parents. And so that idea of strength and wisdom from his mother was one of the stories that I knew from a very early time. The kind of more detailed stuff about seeing bodies in showers and that kind of stuff, those stories came a lot later. So I've known that story all my life. And it's always been a story of strength and hope and a positive story. And then about 10 years ago, I saw my father giving a talk. He mentioned this story, and someone said, well, what did you feel about your mother? And then completely to my surprise, he said that he was really upset and angry at her for forcing that separation when he'd done so much to support them over the preceding 3 years. And that it had taken a long time, really, to kind of process and stop feeling these negative things and to see his mother as a heroic figure. And so the kind of interesting thing is, you hear these stories and you never really, how you process them changes based on your life experience. The Germans didn't come in and decide to kill all the Jews that they could find immediately. That's something that progressed. And there was a kind of series of, first of all, in Germany, wearing yellow stars and stuff, and then in Poland, starting the process of having ghettos, which was not something unknown to Jewish history. And in fact, I believe Piotrków was the first Jewish ghetto in Poland. And then they kind of started restricting, you couldn't go out to work, and there was a process that led to extermination camps and slave labor camps. And my dad, who would have been 9 or 10 at that time, started smuggling food in, going over the walls, and out and trading, getting stuff to trade for food, bringing it back, and using that to support his family. And so it's kind of very heroic stories. Did I see myself that way? I could see myself almost jumping over being, every child wants to think of themselves as that kind of heroic figure. And then the Germans started shooting the boys, and then his mother said, look, you're not going to shouldn't want to see him killed. Anyway, the last time he was going out, he promised his mother he wouldn't do any more smuggling, just one more job. And he collected as much money as he could, and he went to this farmer, and he wanted to buy a load of grain, and it was too heavy for him to carry. And so the farmer said, well, you can drive through the ghetto the way the street worked. You could do it. And so Dad had to give this Polish farmer all the money and just rely on the fact that at this day, he would drive through the piece. And he did. And, there was not like my dad would have taken him to court for breach of contract. And there was some risk for him doing that. And he did that. And it was, my father and his family survived the winter based on that grain. And so that was an act really, it's a business transaction, but it was honourable, and the guy could have easily just not done it. And there's another story that I heard when I was a bit older about when Dad was a slave labourer in his factory. they still lived in a bit of the ghetto. Obviously, there were very few people there, but some Jews had hidden when they were being deported, and the Germans wanted to reduce the numbers and said that you've got to find 200 people, and they weren't going to send them to a camp. They were just going to take them outside and shoot them into the forest and shoot them, which is what they did. And Dad had a card that said he worked in this factory, but they rounded him up anyway, and he said, no, I'm meant to be in the ghetto. You know, you have these, despite the complete illegality and immorality of it, you know, people cling to these rules like it's not fair. I mean, the whole situation is not fair, but from his point of view, he understood, I guess, internalized the fact that Germans killed Jews, and he wasn't meant to be killed at that point. So he was in this synagogue, and they were waiting to get enough Jews to make it worthwhile to run them out, to drive them out to the hills and shoot them. And they picked up a lot of people from his shift at the factory, and the factory manager was saying, where are my Jews? I can't meet my targets, because this was a factory that produced glass medicine bottles that were used by the Germans for medicine. And someone said, oh, you're not going to see them again. They're in the synagogue. They're going to take them out and shoot them. And he went, well, I can't meet my quotas if you don't do that. So they went, oh, okay. And there's a bit of the story that I knew again from my late teens, that there was a man behind him who was carrying a child. And he refused to go without his child. And I used to be able to tell this story when I was younger, very straightforwardly. And the guy refused. The guard said, look, you can't, why, you're both going to die, you know that. And he said, yes. But he refused to leave his child. And so they went and they took somebody else out. And so that was a story that I told, and it was a shocking story, and it's a very melodramatic story. But it's only after I had children that I found it very hard, because instead of being my father's position, I was in the position of the man with the child. The ordinary experience of the Holocaust was that you died if you were Jewish. I can't remember the exact numbers. 6 million Jews perished, very few Jews from Europe survived, and the ordinary experience was to die in starvation, disease, gas chambers, overwork, being shot in the forest, whatever it is, and that's the ordinary experience. What it means for ordinary people, I think, you know, there's also the ordinary people who sat around the side. I mean, this is from my understanding. I mean, what the guards thought of themselves and the people who architected the final solution. You know, there's a famous quote, I can't remember it exactly, but amongst people, some saying, you know, the struggle for us being the people who lead the final solution, the extermination of the Jews, is to preserve our humanity as we kind of stand in the trenches of bodies or whatever. And you think, well, that's a peculiar thing, but they saw themselves as ordinary people doing a job. It was just a horrifying job, and I think, so, I mean, the point is we're all ordinary, as you said. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and some of us are nicer, some of us are less nice. It's just these extraordinary events. When the Russians came to liberate Theresienstadt, they saw what was there and horrified and disgusted. And they said to the inmates, the freed prisoners, that for 24 hours they could do what they liked. They could kill anybody, and no Russians wouldn't stop them doing anything. And I said to my dad, you know, and he would have been 15, 16 at that time, and I said, well, did you do anything? And he said, no. He was hungry, and he was tired, and he was weak, and it wasn't what was on his mind. You know, his mind was on survival, and his mother in particular, I think, search for food was really, really important, and that was the focus. So I think maybe in some respects, revenge is something that you need to be a bit stronger and a bit of a better place to worry about. There's a kind of maybe a hierarchy of things you want to feel. But my dad said that there was a Russian officer who took a real interest in them, and I don't know where they were getting food from, but maybe it was Russians that were feeding them. And then when my dad heard about this organisation that was going to bring a load of Jews who had to be under 16, so they didn't compete with wouldn't take jobs from local workers in the UK, that could come to the UK as orphans, he was going, and my dad said this Russian officer was really disappointed that he wasn't going to stay and help build the Soviet socialist republics and stuff. So my dad came over to the UK. So Windermere was a place of recuperation, starting normalisation. I mean, it's really starting to become a person. So they were all young, and they all had the same, not the same, they all had similar experiences of loss and appalling, disgusting behaviour, things that were done to them and things that they witnessed being done. And so I think probably one thing, the boys, as they called themselves, were not very big on self-pity. My father spent a lot of time just on his own, once they learned to eat properly. So famously, I was told that when they first sat down to meals, they passed the bowl of bread around, and by the time we got to the end of the table, it was always empty because they were always squirreling food away, because that was a good thing to learn. And they had to learn that they didn't need to do that anymore. And not only learn, but actually believe that they didn't need to do that anymore. And that's part, I think, of becoming a person. The World Jewish Relief, who organised everything for them, dispersed them into living together in hostels, effectively with a hostel leader, so that they could start to integrate into society. And they started to kind of have to do jobs, and they were told they had to do jobs. No one was going to give them, and that became a very important part of what they do. And they stayed together, very strong friendships that lasted through their lives. I understand why. I mean, the Holocaust is so unbelievable that the experience of my dad in those 6 years needs to be told, so that we can learn from it and never forget. The capacity for joy amongst my father and his friends, all who were Holocaust survivors, was remarkable. That you think of trauma, like me at the moment, is about sadness and reflection, but that's not how they were at all, ever. The kind of, I mean, they'd all gone through the most terrible things, but when they were together, I'm crying because, I mean, so many of them, not surprisingly, have died. Just kind of remembering them, but they were a remarkable group of people, not only because of what they'd suffered, but because of how they were having gone through that suffering.